Hello everybody and welcome to parksbros. It's Drew here and we're back with Listmas 2022 Day 2, and that means we've got a special guest in Mario from Mostly Coasters. That's not the only fun thing we have planned today though, as we're going to be talking about our top 10 overrated coasters. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't, because we've got another 10 days of Listmas following this. But without further ado, Mario, go ahead and take us away.
Thanks for having me on, Drew. So happy to be here by the warm and cozy fire. And to kick things off, at the bottom of the list, we have the Beast at Kings Island. Now, Kings Island is an amazing park with some amazing roller coasters, and while the Beast is definitely a fun ride, I do not think it reaches that legendary status that so many people think it has. The Beast is currently the longest operating coaster in the world. It's had books written about it, and seemingly every single night that this ride operates, you have fans chanting in the station about how excited they are to ride. And with all of that in mind, you'd think that this is one of the best coasters out there, or at the very least one of the best wooden coasters out there, and I unfortunately think it falls short of that mark. And one of the biggest areas of praise for the Beast is its fantastic night rides, which many coaster enthusiasts consider to be the best night ride out there, but I don't even think it is the best night ride in the park. Now, since the number of unreasonably over-obsessed fans has seemed to decrease over the years, and I personally like this ride a bit more than I have in years past, but it doesn't sit on this list as high up as it used to.
Oh, Mario and his disliking of the Beast lives on. But at number 9, we're going to move just south to Kentucky Kingdom for Storm Chaser. I'm sure a lot of you guys are questioning this pick right now, as it is an amazing RMC coaster. Don't get me wrong, but I can't help but feel like this ride is fairly overhyped, especially from my pal Mostly Coasters. It has some fantastic ejector airtime moments all throughout the ride, but I will mention the layout is a little odd. It truly feels like it's just trying to get from one airtime hill to the other in the quickest way possible, not the most imaginative. And to be honest, outside of that first inverting drop, the rest of the ride just feels like the same moment over and over and over again, so much so that it ends up being painful by that double down near the end. Don't get me wrong, I still think it's a fantastic ride and one of the best rides in that region, but I can't help but feel it's just a tad overhyped, especially when comparing it to another ride at the park.
Coming in at number 8 on this list, we're heading back to Ohio, and this is for RAPTOR at Cedar Point. RAPTOR is one of those coasters that I have really tried hard to enjoy over the years, but for me personally, I feel like something is missing, at least compared to people's description of the ride. A lot of the praise surrounding RAPTOR includes its fast pacing, intense forces, and long ride duration. And while that last point is definitely greatly appreciated, I feel like the pacing and forces have just never quite been there for me. But at the end of the day, it is a good coaster. If I ignore everything everyone has ever said about it, it wouldn't be overrated, but then again, that's what makes something overrated, thus the whole reason this video exists, because people have said something about it that I don't agree with, so this is a video that... Okay, on to the next one.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that one. But at number 7, I'm sure you're going to disagree, buddy, as I have MAKO at SeaWorld Orlando. This B&M hyper coaster at just over 200 feet tall gives some of the best airtime moments in the entirety of the industry, don't get me wrong. As it traverses tons of different parabolic-shaped hills, it will give some of the most sustained floater airtime out there. But again, to me, this is an overhyped ride just for how people treat it in comparison to other coasters, especially at the same park and in the same region. As I remember before Velocicoaster opening, people calling MAKO the best ride in Orlando. But at least in terms of coasters, it wouldn't even have made my top 3. This thing is still ridiculously re-rideable. As I can tell you, I've ridden it over 10 times in a row and could have kept going if the park didn't close. But just like Storm Chaser, this is a lot of rinse and repeat, as it's just the same moment kind of rehashed over and over and over again. While that moment's still really, really good, I can't help but get a little bored by that mid-course brake run. And as you can probably tell, variety is one of the things that I definitely look for more in rides than anything else.
Next up, we have one that is definitely going to frustrate a lot of people out there. That's because at number 6, we have Iron Rattler at Six Flags Fiesta, Texas. But man, oh man, is this thing flawed in areas that people never seem to talk about. Iron Rattler is praised for its fast pace, its signature RMC ejector airtime, and one of the best settings on any roller coaster, diving on, off, and through the quarry wall at Fiesta, Texas. Now, while its setting is nearly unmatched, the airtime is just not nearly as good as I think people make it out to be. The final drop off the quarry wall is definitely the element that receives the most praise amongst coaster enthusiasts, but for me, I've never experienced the strongest ejector airtime coming off of the wall. It is still a fun moment, don't get me wrong, but it seems like this regularly makes people's top 10 list for airtime moments, but honestly, it doesn't even come close for me. And one of the other major issues for this ride for me is its length. And while a lot of coasters can be really amazing despite their shorter length, I don't think Iron Rattler makes perfect use of its time spent throughout its layout. There are a couple elements in there, mainly banked turns, that really don't provide anything extraordinary to the ride experience, thus making the fact that the ride duration isn't the longest feel all the more disappointing. Anyway, feel free to write Santa and tell him to put a lump of coal in my stocking, but either way, we're gonna move on with the list.
Ding dong, Mario's opinion is wrong. I only kid, it's his opinion, and make sure, even if you disagree, to be kind down in those comments below. As remember, an opinion cannot be a fact. And while you're down there, make sure to comment what you think is the most overrated coaster you've been on. But moving on to number 5 now, we have HAGRID'S Magical Creatures Motorbike Adventure at Universal's Islands of Adventure in Orlando, Florida. Man, that's a mouthful. This ride opened in 2019 and was marketed as a storytelling coaster. While I can definitely agree with that, as it does have quite a lot of theming and, of course, something that I adore, a heck of a lot of variety. I mean, probably more variety than any other coaster on the list. The theming to me still seems pretty lackluster in certain sections, and if we're just talking about coaster alone, it isn't the most exciting thing in the world. Again, I truly think this ride is fantastic and one of the best rides in all of Florida. Although I will say it's probably my 4th favorite ride at Islands of Adventure overall, as that park is just stacked to the brim with amazing attractions. But all I hear is constant praise about how this is one of the best coasters of all time. And while I think everyone should ride this eventually, I don't think it's near that. This roller coaster has a lot of cool surprises, as well as a rubber unicorn and some trees painted on a wall. But I will say, even though I think it is overrated, it is still a fantastic ride. Quick, Mario, take the attention away from me.
Next up, we have another Cedar Point coaster. At number 4, we have Top Thrill Dragster. And yes, this is another repeat from Listmas a couple years ago, but I think this ride is just far too overrated to overlook. Now, what issues do I have with this coaster? Well, it's only 3 elements. You have a launch, a top hat, and a spiral drop. But is that inherently a problem? Well, no. You can tell from off the ride and from any videos of the ride that this is obviously a very short coaster in duration, so you do know what to expect. But my goodness me, some people like to say this is the best launch coaster out there. Some people like to say it has the best launch, which I disagree. I think Accelerator at Knott's Berry Farm has a much better launch. It has a more forceful launch. It accelerates quicker. People like to say that you get airtime going over the top hat. I don't find that to be the case. The one part I do enjoy is going down the spiral drop. But again, how are you going to praise a roller coaster that only has 3 elements? I've just never been the biggest fan of coasters with really short ride durations, and if you are a coaster with a really short ride duration, you gotta do something insanely impressive to overcome that hurdle, and I just don't think Top Thrill Dragster does. Overrated.
Hopping over now to number 3, we're going to be staying in Ohio, going to Kings Island this time, though, for the B&M Hyper known as Diamondback at Kings Island. I know having a second B&M Hyper on this list is kind of weird, as we already talked about MAKO quite a bit. All I can say though is imagine Diamondback is the older, bigger, and potentially better version of MAKO all around, at least if you like that one type of airtime over and over and over and over again. Just like every ride I've mentioned on this list thus far, I think it's still an amazing ride and definitely worth doing. But it lacks a lot of that variety that I crave, as well as it's compared to other rides within the same park and region pretty unfairly. The one type of airtime that it bolsters is quite great, as you'll be calmly floating out of your seat over and over again, especially if you're sitting towards the back row on that second half of the ride. And the seating arrangement is kind of cool, as you feel like you've always got room. But by the time we've gone through the 7th parabolic hill, I can't help but think something different would be kind of cool. The biggest reason, though, that this ride is overhyped in my opinion is the fact that so many people consider it to be the best ride in the park. And if you love that one type of floater airtime over and over again, it makes total sense. But for me personally, it's maybe at number 5 at best, as Kings Island is just one of those parks with so many fantastic roller coasters. It just boggles me how so many people seem to sleep on things like Orion and Banshee and of course Mystic Timbers.
Alright, now that I'm nearly ready to pass out, we're getting close to the end of the list, with Superman KRYPTON Coaster at Six Flags Fiesta Texas coming in at number 2. Now, while every other coaster that I have mentioned on this list prior does receive far more praise than Superman, I do think that for those coasters, it is still much more deserved. Superman KRYPTON Coaster is often regarded to be the best floorless coaster out there, and at a first glance it is easy to understand why. Much like Iron Rattler at the same park, it has incredible terrain interaction with that quarry wall, diving off and onto it multiple times. It has an incredibly long track length, providing a long ride experience as well, and it has some really awesome elements that include 7 inversions and this very interesting 360-degree turn on the quarry wall. Now, all that sounds great, so where do the problems come in? Ultimately, it all comes down to comfort. This is one of the shakiest steel coasters I have ever been on, with certain portions even feeling like a wooden coaster. That makes the aforementioned positive of this being a long ride experience all of a sudden become a negative when you're sort of just looking forward to the end of the ride. And aside from the discomfort, the forces of this ride just aren't really there. Every element tends to feel quite similar, even though you are being moved around in different ways. The vertical loop does not provide too many positive G-forces, the zero-G roll is not very whippy, and there isn't really anything else that impresses me as far as forces are concerned. Ultimately, I think this ride is a similar caliber to Scream at Magic Mountain, and honestly a step down from something like Rougarou at Cedar Point. Drew, my dude, what's number 1?
Well, I'm glad you asked, Mario, because I have a feeling you're going to agree wholeheartedly with this. It's Icebreaker at SeaWorld Orlando. I know we've gone there twice already, but holy cow, this ride I feel like got a ton of praise from the gate. Opening earlier this year in 2022, I got to ride it in rider previews. And while just about every coaster enthusiast and their mother was talking about how amazing the airtime was, I rode it and was honestly pretty let down. I think this coaster is still fairly fun, but I will say it's the first coaster in a very long time that I've gotten nauseous on, and couldn't help but feel like I was in quite a bit of pain. Those airtime moments, while forceful of course, are quite repetitive, as well as going back and forth 4 different times in the same 300 feet of track. This ride just felt too intense for the audience they were trying to reach out to, as well as feels like 2 different rides completely, where the first half is as intense as a Skyrocket 2, and the second half is less intense than Wavebreaker the Rescue Coaster. It's a pretty crazy and obvious juxtaposition in layout choice, and I really can't help but feel that first half getting really unnecessary by the third launch. But to me, that crazy ejector airtime really doesn't make up for the rest of the ride, repeating itself over and over again, and then heading towards that final brake run in kind of a lackluster way, especially in comparison to how intense that first half is. And maybe I think this ride is overrated just because so many people had lower expectations and were blown away by them after finally getting to experience Icebreaker, where my expectations were about met. But there you have it, our top 10 overrated coasters for Listmas 2022. Oh my goodness, it was so much fun having you on, Mario. You got anything to say?
Thanks again for having me on, Drew. If you guys enjoyed this at all, please head on over to my channel, Mostly Coasters, where you can find a video that Drew and I did together of the top 10 underrated coasters that we've been on, and all other types of theme park and roller coaster content.
Yeah, make sure to go check out that top 10 underrated coasters list on Mario's channel. And of course, speaking of underrated, I think Mario's channel is quite underrated, so please go subscribe. He's got some amazing content on there. But I wanted to let you know, thank you so much for watching, and if you're ready for more Listmas in the near future, make sure to subscribe here at parksbros, because we have another 10 days of Listmas all the way through the end of December coming out, leading to my top 25 coasters overall on December 25th. Thank you again so much for watching, and until the next list, we'll see you on the next ride.